Morning everyone and welcome back to This Week in F1, and what a week it has been. Red Bull have finally been stopped. The energy drink terrorism has come to an end. Kind of. Well, not really, but they didn't win, and that is all that matters. Have that, you miserable, fun-ruining bastards. Oh, they're gonna bend over the grid at Japan.
What would you be if you were attached to another object by an inclined plane wrapped helically around an axis? Screwed.
Anyway, what a race weekend, and I want to start by talking about...
What has happened? We need to know who's going to come out in front as we see Lance Stroll hitting the barrier and going over the curb one more time.
What a colossal cock. Now, we have seen over the years that money can buy you an F-seat in F1, but it doesn't mean that it can buy you the skill to drive in F1, and usually these people will be found out who pay for their seats and will only last a couple seasons. However, this monkey has been there since 2017. Do you know what's happened since 2017? The amount of shit that's changed since then. We have had 4 prime ministers. We have had a global pandemic. We have endured Nikita Mazepin and Nicholas Latifi until Mazepin decided to invade Ukraine and Latifi decided to go to business school.
Do you know what you have done?
Business.
For fuck's sakes, the most powerful seat in the country has switched arses since he's been in F1, yet his maple syrup covered behind is firmly planted in that Aston Martin. Get rid of that bastard!
You bastards!
Moving on from that colossal cock, and because of that colossal cock, it meant Piastri was knocked out of qualifying. However, it also meant that Yuki Tsunoda topped the timing charts for Q1, so swings and roundabouts. I don't get that saying. It means positives and negatives, but when I was a child, I firmly remember enjoying the swings as much as I enjoyed the roundabout. What a stupid fucking language. Anyway, Q2 is where things get interesting, with both Red Bulls being knocked out, and even more interesting than that, Verstappen being knocked out by Red Bull new boy Liam Lawson in the AlphaTauri, meaning the fastest Red Bull driver on the day was in an AlphaTauri. What the fuck?
What the fuck?
But obviously I cannot talk about Red Bull in qualifying without talking about how Max Verstappen managed to escape any grid penalties. Now, I'm not one to put on my tinfoil hat and call corruption. However, this was very dodgy. First of all, the Q1 sitting at the end of the pit lane not moving thing. That's just something you don't really see, and I have no idea what was going on or why he did it, but it didn't really seem to disadvantage anyone else or benefit him, so I can understand why that was looked over. But the Yuki Tsunoda incident, that was a fucking sham. That is a slam dunk penalty. Now, I have 2 main issues with this one. One, AlphaTauri didn't send any representatives in, and this was probably because Horner was holding them at gunpoint, but still very dodgy. And my second issue is the excuse for why he didn't get a penalty. The reason given was a communications issue, and if that's a reason to get out of a penalty in qualifying, then there's no point having penalties in qualifying. Most qualifying penalties this season can basically be narrowed down to a communication error. So that is some bullshit by the FIA, and there is something a bit sus going on there.
He's cheating! He's cheating!
Now, after the corrupt energy drink was kicked out in Q2, in Q3 we saw a fight for pole, which was eventually claimed by Carlos Sainz, who had been on fire the entire weekend, and going into the race he seemed to be the favourite. And when 5 red lights went out, he cemented that by pulling away ahead of Charlie Brown and the bug-eyed Tory. Just behind them, Hamilton decided that he didn't feel like making the corner, so completely outbraked himself, going into the runoff and taking 2 places. And this brings us to talking point number 1 of the race, Hamilton giving the position back to both George and Norris. Now everyone seems to accept him giving the position back to George because he overtook him off track, but the Lando one has confused some people. So the way I see it is that Lewis and Lando were alongside, but Lewis brakes a lot later, making it seem like he's ahead. However, what he's actually done is outbrake himself and take the runoff, giving himself an advantage, and if he didn't do that, then he would have gone side by side into the corner with Lando, so he had to give the position back because he gained the advantage. advantage by having to brake less into the corner. Maybe that made sense, maybe it didn't, but that's personally how I see it. And remember, if you don't agree, I'm just a bean on the internet, so why do you give a fuck? Also on these opening laps, Perez decided he'd had enough of getting humiliated by AlphaTauri and slammed into Yuki Tsunoda, causing the Japanese driver to retire from the race the second week in a row. And this wasn't the Mexicans' last attack on current and past Red Bull drivers, but we will get to that in a bit.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
Now we skip a few laps to lap 19, where Logan Sargent decided to give the barrier a good old smooch, causing his front wing to drag behind him like Alonso dragging Aston Martin up the championship table. This then brought out the safety car and everyone dived into the pit, which switched up the grid and sent the Red Bulls up the order as they decided not to pit. So this still left Carlos Sainz in the lead, however Leclerc dropped down the pack after pulling some weird manoeuvre trying to back everyone up coming into the pits. A few laps after the pit lane chaos and the safety car comes in, Sainz fucks off into the distance and then Norris overtakes Perez, and then George overtakes Verstappen, and then Norris gets past Verstappen, and then Hamilton gets past Verstappen, and then Leclerc gets past Verstappen, and the two Red Bulls are left behind as the top five fuck off into the distance, leaving the Red Bulls to contemplate their shit show of a weekend, and probably plot their revenge for Japan and Liam Lawson.
On a scale from 1 to 10, my friend, you're fucked.
Now skipping to lap 41, and the Alpine engine suddenly remembered it was French, so did what the French do best and went on strike, bringing out a virtual safety car. Mercedes then decided to box both cars onto the medium, setting up a grandstand finish. With 9 laps to go, the Mercedes stormed past Charlie Brown, leaving him with nothing, which in all fairness was the Ferrari plan.
I love Pakistan, I will sacrifice my life for Pakistan!
And then with 4 laps to go, Carlos Sainz uses his enormous brain and engages the power of friendship and the drag reduction system, and decides to keep Norris within DRS to defend the German manufacturer's attack.
Lando 0.8 behind, 0.8 with DRS, Russell no DRS. Yeah, it's on purpose.
And using the power of friendship, they managed to keep the Third Reich, Mercedes, at bay. And all this culminated in the wall turning in on Tory Boy.
On board, final lap. And you see Norris there with the right rear and Russell with the right front. He did take out.
He just fully turned into me.
This then meant that Sainz took first, Lando second, and the walking fashion show came third. An absolute 10 out of 10 race, with everything from strategy battles to on-track battles to fights in the midfield, safety cars, virtual safety cars, terrorism, lizards, actual lizards. It had everything.
Beautiful.
So what this means is we need to liquidate Red Bull and send Helmut Marko to the fiery pits of hell where he belongs so F1 can be this enjoyable every goddamn week. Fuck you, Adrian Newey, and your massive brain for ruining this sport. I'm sick of it and I'm sick of you. Ah!
Whoa, pump the hate brakes.
And on the topic of Red Bull, we need to talk about Sergio Perez terrorism. He did it on the first few laps with Yuki Tsunoda, and then in the final few laps on Alex Albon. Both were just clumsy, overly aggressive and avoidable mistakes, yet he managed to ruin the races of 2 people and have no real effect on his own race, which has some people up in arms. But the issue is he was given a penalty, and there's not much they can do after that, similar to the Hamilton and Piastri incident last race. So what can you do when you live in a shoe? So what does all of this mean for the championship? Well, for once Red Bull and Verstappen don't pull further ahead. And I swear to God I jinxed it. Last race, when I said this, Verstappen and Red Bull pull even further ahead. And by God, I'm so sick of saying that. Next race, which is Singapore, I'm just going to put this clip in and it will be exactly the same and it will make just as much sense. But I don't care. No Red Bull, no sadness. With his podium finish, Hamilton jumps to P3 in the standings, leapfrogging Alonso after the Aston's drop-off in performance in recent weeks. Sainz also closes the gap to the Spanish grandpa, as does Charlie Brown. Liam Lawson had an astonishing drive to pick up his first points in F1, which means AlphaTauri finally have more points than drivers. And for the most important result of the weekend, P10 went to Kevin Magnussen, which gives me my 3rd correct P10 for the season and my second in a row. My brain is bigger than everyone's. Except Adrian Newey's, but he can go fuck himself. And there are now 2 drivers yet to score points. Now on to the news, and with no episode last week, I will be covering 2 weeks worth of news, which still isn't much of note. Starting off with the unsurprising news that Helmut Marko is a massive racist. Who saw that coming? And he was officially told to stop being such a cunt by the FIA after saying that Checo was not hardworking because he was Mexican. We all knew he was a cunt, and he's still somehow employed by Red Bull.
It's time to go!
Moving on, and in other Perez news, he now has a McDonald's menu item for some reason. I'm not really sure how this happened, and I'm not even sure what it is, but good for him. Hulkenberg has called out the terribly bad development at Haas, which isn't surprising considering the biggest role Steiner plays is his part in Drive to Survive.
Now we're a fucking bunch of wankers.
Aston Martin's Mike Crack has said that Lance Stroll is on a similar level to Fernando Alonso. Oh, do fuck off. It seems daddy's money doesn't only buy a seat, but it also buys false compliments. Alpine don't believe that 5-year plans are applicable in F1 anymore, which is kind of an issue when their entire time in F1 has been based around a 5-year plan.
I may not have a brain, gentlemen, but I have an idea.
Toto Wolff has proved just how Austrian he is, saying that he would rather lose a championship before breaking rules, which is great, but all I hear is excuses and no results. I think he needs to stop talking so much and focus on building a car capable of winning the championship, because he has been speaking a lot lately, yet his team hasn't won a single race this season, so maybe he should focus on that first. Guan Yu Zhou is set to be at Alpha for the 2024 season, as is Yuki for AlphaTauri, and in my opinion, both drivers deserve their seats, and this is good news. However, in rather disappointing news, the FIA announced that every team is under the cost cap this season, which means no F1 Twitter explosion. Vowles has said that Albon should be aiming to win races, which is a ridiculous amount of pressure in that Williams, but fair play to Super GT. And finally, Hugo Boss and Adidas are set to fight it out for the title sponsor of the AlphaTauri team, in the weirdest fight since OnlyFans Don started scrapping on boxing cards. In a bit.